Our newspaper review. Sally and I are going to look at the stories that are making headlines around the world, and we kick off with the global impact of these travel restrictions, of course, sparked by the volcanic ash from Iceland, and of course they're dominating this morning. The Times is reporting that Prime Minister Gordon Brown's under pressure to get Britain flying again. An emergency meeting of ministers will decide today if Britain should reopen its airspace.
Now, obviously, this story has many, many angles. This is the Daily Telegraph saying British Airways chief executive has challenged the blanket ban after a test flight to find out how aircraft are affected. Obviously, a story we've looked at as well.
And Dubai's Gulf News says the travel disruptions cost European carriers $200 million a day. With the crisis now entering a fifth day, the newspaper says Europe has ordered an investigation into the loss of billions of euros.
Now, some of the other stories in the press, that Goldman Sachs story, a big one. This is Wall Street Europe leading on the fight back planned by Goldman Sachs after the US Securities Exchange Commission accused it of fraud. The bank has denied the allegations and has vowed to defend the charges vigorously.
Now, with just over a fortnight to go before the British election, the Financial Times is reporting investors fear the effects of a hung parliament. 10 leading investment funds have told the FT that potential delays in tackling Britain's £167 billion deficit is the biggest threat to the market.
And the business pages of the South China Morning Post is saying China is catching up with Europe on solar farms. According to Merrill Lynch, China is forecast to show 20-fold growth in installations to 4,000 megawatts by 2012.
Well, here with us is Bundeep Singh Rangar, the chairman of the Indian transaction advisory firm, IndusView. First of all, thank you very much indeed for making it in, because we understand that you've been stranded and you've come in from Berlin.
Absolutely, a 12-and-a-half-hour train ride, Berlin, Rotterdam, Brussels, and the one seat in Eurostar I could get.
Well, we're really honoured. Thank you very much indeed.
Glad to be here.
But it does seem very much, doesn't it, as though the full economic impact is becoming ever clearer, and now, of course, the pressure's on.
Absolutely. I mean, the airlines themselves, they say they're losing about 200 million euros a day. Now, I mean, if you take out sort of the fuel costs and landing charges costs they're saving, I guess they're losing about 100 million a day, but that's still a lot of money. And then the indirect effect on businesses is obviously profound, ourselves included.
Now, I mean, the Times angle on this is, you know, Gordon Brown now under pressure, the government, of course, to try and decide what to do about airspace above the UK in particular, and all sorts of talk as well about the Navy being on standby to rescue travellers from southern Spain where they are receiving flights, etc., etc., and all these sort of operations in place to get people home.
I guess, you know, the good news in here is that maybe the ash is actually coming down a little bit, and the flights that take place above 20,000 feet. So there's some talk that they may be able to open up 50% of the airspace today to allow for flights that fly above that ash cloud that's out there and fly at 20 to 30,000 feet above sea level. Is the Navy going to rescue people from Spain? I don't know. I mean, John Cleese took a whole, you know, spent 10 grand to get back, and I think that kind of says if people are desperate to get back, they'll find a way.
I mean, come on, being rescued from southern Spain.
Rather stay there, right?
But in the meantime, British Airways does a test flight, goes through the no-fly zone and finds that when its plane lands in Cardiff, all is well, although I know that the plane is being looked at now by engineers to, you know, more in-depth checks, but nothing dramatic happened. It wasn't sort of falling out of the sky or anything like that.
No, I mean, KLM, Lufthansa, and now British Airways have all had flights. And I guess what they're trying to do is collect data, because the Met Office provides, I guess, data from the ground. And what's really been missing is data from the sky, from the air. And that's what they've gone and set out recorders to capture the data for.
And of course, this whole chaotic situation is feeding in to general election fever, which we have here in Britain. And so the pressure again is intensified upon Gordon Brown and his government to appear to be in charge, even though perhaps it's the scientists who'll eventually make the decisions.
Scientists and I guess the COBRA authority for aviation in Europe. I think it's great news, by the way, for video conference companies and telephone companies and trains, because that's, you see, the contingency plans not coming into effect. So, you know,
there's always winners. There's always winners in this situation.
Absolutely.
Talking about winners and losers, Goldman Sachs versus the regulators. Now, this is a very interesting one, Bundeep, and I know everyone across the world, in terms of market watchers, investors, will be so interested in this situation.
Yeah, God's own company, right? So, look, I mean, here's what Goldman Sachs, I think, did, let's say, perhaps improperly. They sold mortgage-backed securities, and they sold billion-dollar packages, including to a German bank called IKB.
And including to Royal Bank of Scotland.
RBS as well, yes. And at the same time, it packaged an instrument that said should the value of those securities decline, you can bet against it. So in other words, you can make money even if the value dropped, while they're selling the same package to investors saying this is going to appreciate in value and you get a good healthy dividend or good healthy yield. So I think the issue here is one of full disclosure. That's really the issue, because you didn't tell the guys buying the CDOs that they could also buy into a decline in the same value. They sold that to a whole different group, and for ostensible purposes that was packaged by Paulson & Co., which made $1 billion that the investors lost.
Now, I mean, whilst this is going on, obviously Goldman Sachs is going to fight this tooth and nail, and we must state this is all allegations
Absolutely.
at the moment. But Goldman Sachs was seen as the company or the bank that was making hay whilst the others were being bailed out. They were busy snapping up assets that were going cheap, etc., and getting lots of business because a lot of investment banks were out of the frame. I mean, there's a lot of interest here, including the fact that they were a big funder of the Obama administration's presidential campaign. A lot going on in the background.
Absolutely, and I think what Goldman Sachs has this reputation that has been sort of gold standard, and I think the fact is that now that is going to suffer damage regardless of whether it's a right or wrong. And now you see Germany and the UK following the SEC and saying we'll investigate as well. The silent winner in all this, by the way, is actually JP Morgan, because they've done a great job. They've bought out Merrill Lynch. They don't take the headlines for making statements like Bankfeed has made in the past. But I think they win. And
moving on to the Financial Times, Bundeep, reporting that investors are now in fear of a hung parliament here in Britain. Why?
Well, you've seen the darling boy of the last debate, and the Lib Dems come out of nowhere, and now the YouGov poll saying they're #1, even beating the Tories. So I guess that's. A hung parliament's never good politically, and sterling, you can see sterling futures are down because people are saying sterling gets affected. So,
Bundeep Singh Rangar of IndusView, thank you very much indeed for making it in to talk us through the papers today.
Thank you.
That's all from us for now.
Bye-bye.
Find the stories that interest you at bbc.com/news. Click here to watch the 1-minute World News Summary online. bbc.com/news. Watch the news unfold.